Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Today, we are honored to have two special guests who have co-authored a book. Let's begin by introducing our first author. Julie O'Connor, PhD, has been a teacher and instructional supervisor for over 20 years in both the New York City and Cliffside Park, New Jersey public school systems. Specializing in English language learning, Dr. O'Connor obtained her PhD by studying how humane education dealing with pro-social learning that includes kindness to animals improves student education. She holds two master's degrees, and she earned her PhD in education from North Central University. She has presented on the topic of humane education at numerous conferences, including the Oxford Animal Ethics Summer School, the NJEA Teachers Convention, and the American Teacher Educators Conference. Her publications include the peer-reviewed study entitled Humane Education's Effect on Middle School Student Motivation and Standards-Based Reading Assessment, as well as the nonfiction book United States of Friendship, Pen Pals of 9/11. Dr. O'Connor currently serves as the Educational Director for the Animal Protection League of New Jersey. Julie O'Connor became friends with co-author Elaine Mrozcka years after 9/11. Elaine earned a Master's of Education from the University of Illinois and taught mostly primary children for 37 years. While teaching in third grade in Yorkville, Illinois, she was named a most influential educator and named to Who's Who among American teachers. She's now retired. Elaine has written 5 books. Grandma's Gems of Wisdom feature her grandma's wise sayings. A Pig's Tale is a true story that was written while Elaine was teaching primary grades. Awesome Wonders of Our Amazing World is a travel book about the many places visited with her husband. Essie's Poetry compiles her mom's poetry. Elaine's mother always wanted to be published, but Elaine's mother passed away before that happened. When Elaine found an old file of her mom's poems, she submitted them for publication. United States of Friendship, Pen Pals of 9/11 is the book co-authored with Julie that retells their story after the terrorist attacks of that day. It stresses how a simple act of kindness can really make a difference in people's lives. Julie O'Connor, Elaine Mrozcka, welcome to An Author's Journey. We are honored to have this opportunity for you both to join us.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, for this opportunity. We really appreciate it.
It's an honor to have both of you here. And I want to jump right into the questions because I know there's a whole lot that you have to say. And I'm fascinated by some of the responses that you gave to me in our little pre-meeting. So let's jump right in. I'd like to begin with the last words of my introduction. The story you have told of 9/11 stresses how a simple act of kindness can really make a difference in people's lives. Julie, what led you to make this idea of making a difference the main focus of your book?
Well, again, thanks for having me, Joe. And it's a great question. I've long felt that empathy should be more promoted throughout society. Political leaders, teachers, other types of leaders can both model and encourage that we can all make a difference. And I view this book as part of my effort to focus attention on people's ability to repair the world.
Now, Elaine, did this book begin with this particular focus in mind, or did you originally have a different purpose that you wish to pursue?
Well, when 9/11 happened, we knew no one in New York City or anywhere out east. And adults could donate money, they could donate blood, they could do other things to help. But children 8 and 9 years old are really limited. And our class was very touched by what had happened. And so we felt that the majority of kids would be in New York that were affected by this. And so we just wanted to let somebody know that there were people out there that cared. That was our only purpose of doing what we did. And so I knew my kids could write letters, and we wrote letters. And so the children addressed them to any third grade student, and I wrote to any third grade teacher. We put them in an envelope and addressed it to any third grade class, any elementary school in New York City, New York. I took it to the Yorkville post office, and the lady there picked out a Manhattan zip code and put it on the envelope. And we didn't know if they would be delivered. But I told my kids at least we had tried. And that was the sole purpose, was to let somebody out there know people did care.
And what was the response of your students when you went to them and said, we're going to do this project, but we're not really sure if it's going to work or not? How did they respond to that?
They were very eager to do this. They wanted to help. Everyone in America was touched by this, all this tragedy. And so everyone wanted to do something. And this was the one thing that little children could do. And they were so eager to do it. And they really wanted to respond. We were hoping that our letters would be delivered, but we really didn't know. And even to this day, I still don't know the answer of how our letters ended up in New York in Julie's class. And Julie was the lucky teacher who got our letters. We still don't know that answer.
Well, thankfully, it worked out.
Yes, it did.
Let me ask both of you this question. And Elaine, I'll ask you to respond first. Where were each of you when on 9/11 the first plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center?
Well, I was at school, and my class was in the library, and half of my class was learning computer management and how to use a computer. The other half was in the library selecting books to read and to check out. And a teacher rushed into the library, pulled the librarian and myself off to the side, and said a mother had just come to school, wanted her child immediately because our country was under attack and planes were being flown into buildings out east. And of course, we were all stunned. When we returned back to our class, we weren't allowed to say anything. We didn't have TVs in those days. We didn't have phones in our rooms. So we were totally isolated and didn't know what was really going on until later in the day when we got a directive from the superintendent and the principal of how to handle this with our children. And it was quite a frightening, scary day for all of us, no matter where you were in the United States.
Was there anything you did that was special to calm the kids down, either as an individual teacher or as a building?
Well, once they told us how to handle it with the children, to just let them know that planes had been flying into buildings. We don't know what's going on, but we know it's something serious. We had an open house scheduled for that week that got canceled. So we talked about it a lot. I mean, all of the lesson plans went off to the wayside because this was the topic of conversation. This is what everyone was focused on. And we told the children, honestly, we really didn't understand what was going on. And like I said, we had no media, no TV, no nothing to inform us until we got home and saw it ourselves on television.
And Julie, where were you when the first plane hit?
Well, like Elaine, I was actually teaching in a classroom. My classroom was in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan. And the few differences, though, first of all, we didn't have any TV as well. But when a teacher came into my classroom and I was teaching and said, oh, someone flew a plane into the building. And then, at first your impression is it's a small plane. Then they came and said, oh no, a second plane. And then people start really panicking and saying, New York City is under attack. And we're in New York City. And then I get, the kids are working. And then I get, strangely enough, a message from my husband saying he was okay. And I'm like, what's going on? Because he was working downtown. He couldn't reach me by cell phone because something that people don't realize unless they're around here in that attack, there were some major cell towers that were taken out. They were on top of the World Trade Center, as well as this massive high call volume that was happening. So no one was able to reach each other on cell phones that day. So he ended up, because he worked downtown, calling the landline of my sister-in-law in California, who then called my work on a landline to leave me the message saying, "Oh, your husband's okay." My sister also worked more downtown. I didn't know, if she was going to be okay, but I also was very in the dark generally. Uh, as only about an hour after that, then the parents started coming and getting their kids. And so then I'm down to about noontime, a few kids. And that's when my principal was like, okay, for all the teachers who live in different areas, you can start making your way home. And so um, that began its own harrowing tale about how I got back across the bridge because bridges had been closed. Uh, Also, these really loud helicopters were flying so low. These military helicopters. It was like a movie, like an apocalyptic movie, and it was very scary because you really weren't aware if the threat had been neutralized or not at that point, right? So. You were still very scared. But also, I was happy to know my husband was okay. I had a feeling my sister was okay. When we all eventually got back to the house, it was a very huge relief. But it isn't a day that I like to focus on because it was a time where you were really actively scared and, just grateful that the people in my immediate circle were okay. But there was something just to what Elaine is saying about the idea that your communication, it's so different 21 years ago than today. You're not going on the internet. You don't have a TV or what today is called a smart board in the classroom. You can't reach anybody by cell phones. There was no text that people were doing back in that day. Um, so the fear partly comes from a total lack of information. And the parents obviously had more information because they were busy picking up their kids all day. We are in a classroom. We don't have that information. So it was kind of a nutty day, and I'm just grateful that in the end, people were really pitching together to help people get home, which also, is a little bit what we'll talk about later in this interview about our book. It really had a lot of community working together that day, helping each other that day, and that's important too.
This may be a good time to ask this question then. What gave you the impetus, Julie, to create United States of Friendship Pen Pals of 9/11? What was the vision that you had, or the purpose behind feeling that you needed to get this message out to folks?
Well, I really would have to pivot that a little bit to Elaine because Elaine was the impetus behind the book.
Mhm.
She approached me, and I know it has to do with her coming across some of the memorabilia of the time. But I guess I'll let her tell, and then she called me, and the rest is history. So, Elaine.
Well, I was already publishing the first book that I had written. The pandemic allowed me the time to do that. And I was cleaning out a storage room. It was snowing. It was in February a few years ago. And I was cleaning out a storage room and I found the box of all of our information, the articles, the pictures, the New York Times article, the fact that we were on the Today Show, because of our Pen Pal project that we continued that whole year of 2001 and 2002. And when I found it, I thought, there's a whole generation that's been born that doesn't know all of the good things that happened out of the evil that happened that day. And I thought, we really need to retell this story. And so I got in touch with Julie, and we've been friends for 21 years. And so I contacted her and said, I'm publishing. I already have the contacts. I've already run this past my publishing assistant. And she said, absolutely, this is a story that needs to be told. And so we decided to just retell our story the way it happened, the actual events that each of us experienced. And we decided to do it as a conversation. So there was really no disagreement of how we were going to do it. And we kept it with the United States with the flag and the red, white, and blue. And we knew the pages would be white. So I wrote with red, she wrote with blue ink, and we wrote on side to side pages so that our story was more like a conversation of what really happened to us during that time.
I just would want to add that what I do believe, though, what Elaine's point was that the aftermath of September 11th, the children today, they might be taught about September 11th, but they really don't understand how much unity there was in this country after. And so I'm really glad we have that record now.
Yes, absolutely.
It's interesting that we a lot of times focus on the historical aspects, but it seems that the two of you wanted more to focus on the humane aspects, the idea that even in horrible, challenging times, that the goodness of people comes out. And that's a powerful message.
Absolutely. I agree totally. And that is really the most important thing to learn from this book and from our experience.
Now, when you both decided that you were going to get together and pursue this book, were there certain materials or entries or incidents, events that you felt were non-negotiable, that they had to be part of what you were going to write about? And I open this to either of you or both.
Well, for me, I wanted to make sure that it was just an accurate retelling of the events, and that there was the through line throughout the book is that people can be empowered to help each other, and that if you have any belief that you receive what you put out, I would say that in part, that attention that Elaine was referring to, that being on the Today Show, being in the New York Times, people were craving those types of stories. Um, and maybe if it inspires some people to also uh, put out some goodness, and hopefully they'll get that back for themselves, and that nice positive vibes from others. But I just wanted to make sure that whatever we did wasn't embellished. It was just a very straightforward telling of the story, and the story in a way speaks for itself.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to understand that what goes around comes around. What we give out into the world is what we get back a thousandfold. And if we're kind to others, those kindnesses will come back to us when we least expect it from people that we least expect. And I think that's one of the main things we need to learn from this is that we need to reach out to each other and to be kind and it's still valid today as it was 21 years ago. It's still important.
It sounds as if the message of karma is very strong as
Yeah,
a foundation.
actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, I know that there are a lot of questions that you get asked by uh, media hosts and readers. Is there a question that has been the most difficult that someone has asked you about either your book or the events of 9/11? And Julie, let me go to you first with this.
So I with this particular topic, if you will, I would say that the most difficult thing that I've dealt with hasn't necessarily been a question, but that in this book, I have had a lot of dealings with people who lost family members during the attacks, and they come up to me and they discuss this book. I was at the teachers convention is how I met you. And I've gone to other events where I've had the book out and discussing with the book in this whole area that I live in a suburb of Manhattan. You really do encounter a fair amount of people who are personally touched by September 11th, depending on the degree, from directly impacted or maybe a little bit more removed. But the most challenging things has been people who are, very impacted by September 11th, and that just requires a lot of sensitivity when I'm talking about it with them to just I never want anyone to believe that I am um, in a way not respectful of the time, and I want to give them that space to tell their story to me. And just a lot of times that is a conversation that can be a little bit challenging if it's a crowded environment, but you definitely want to focus on what a person's expressing. So, but all the reaction from those people has been so positive, and they're actually quite happy that the book is out there. But it is something that you're like, okay, I gotta make sure I get this conversation right when it's a person who lost someone so close to them.
And so you're basically being supportive and being a good listener.
Yes, yes.
And I'm sure those are skills that both of you have taught to your students over the years.
I hope so.
Absolutely.
Elaine, how about you? What's the most difficult question or challenge that you faced?
Well, obviously, being in the Midwest, not being in the East Coast, and not really knowing anyone in New York, we weren't as touched as you were personally, but we still were affected certainly by this. But we were on News Nation in the summer, and one of the things, we had no preparation. We thought they were going to talk about our book, and the moderator asked me the question of what was my message to the world, that I wanted the world to know from our experience and from our book. And basically, off of the top of my head, I came up with the fact that we really need to still be kind to one another, whether it's a smile, whether it's opening a door, whether it's calling somebody that's alone, checking in, whatever we need to do to be kind, we need to do that today, just as much as we needed it 21 years ago. There's still evil out there. We still need to think of others and show some empathy. And that's an important lesson for all of us. I don't care if you're a child, you're an adult, somewhere in between. You really need to learn to be kind and thoughtful to each other and take an interest in other people. And that's the whole point of our book, was just to pay an act of kindness forward. And I hope people will learn that that's what they need to do too.
And what I hear you saying is that it's not only important to have in the classroom, but it's an important life skill. It's one of
Yes,
the
it is.
so-called power skills that
Yes,
we
it
all
is.
need to follow. That being kind is not just a social skill or a skill that's ever going to be tested, but without that skill, it becomes difficult to be supportive and to find the good, as Alex Haley says, and praise it.
Mm.
Yes. You get a lot more bees with honey than you do vinegar, as Grandma always used to say.
Yeah, I
And
remember that one.
that's absolutely the truth. If you're kind, you get a lot farther in this world than being mean and evil.
Now, Elaine, my podcast is called An Author's Journey. So I need to ask an author's question to
Sure.
both of you. When was the first time that you knew you wanted to be a writer?
Probably back when I was in college, in the 60s. Um, I knew two people who became authors and were published. And the thought went through my head, wow, that's pretty cool. I think I'd like to do that someday. And it just kind of sat in the back of my head and on that back burner. And I focused on my career for 37 years and And then when I retired, my husband and I traveled the world until the pandemic hit. And when that hit, it gave me the time to really focus on possibly doing this. And I remember one day my husband was out playing golf with several of his buddies, and he came home and I was at the computer and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm writing a book." And he looked at me like, "What?" And so that was the beginning back in probably the spring or summer of 2020 is when I began writing.
Okay. And Julie, the same question. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
So I would say that it came to me late in life. I chose to go back for my PhD, and my professional writing came from that. So I write articles about my topic of study for different educational journals. And as for this book, when Elaine approached me, I felt confident I could write our true story, after my previous writing experience.
Now, were there flashes of your desire to be a writer when you were a young girl going through the elementary, middle, high school routine, or did it really kick in when you were pursuing your doctorate?
I would say there weren't. So I went to a college that was very writing heavy, Sarah Lawrence College, and there was a lot of writing courses with
Yeah.
that. But it's funny, I never really wanted to write until I felt I had something to say. So with the PhD, it was like, okay, I'm passionate about this topic of study, and I'll write that. But so it's not like I was a person who wrote all the time. So it's funny. I guess you never end your journey as a possible budding writer, right? Because it came to me a little later. I will say, just for a fun thing, is when you find a journal that, I used to take a journal when I did my junior year abroad in college, and I read that, and I was like, who is this person who wrote this every day? So I do always hear people say, oh, people should keep a journal, and it is great to read it later, but it wasn't always a natural fit, the writing thing for me. So I'm glad to be doing it now, though.
Elaine, in your younger days, in those elementary, middle, high school times, um, did writing attract you at all, or were you more toward the science or math?
No, I think probably the reading and writing were really important to me. My mom was a writer, she was an artist. Um, she exposed us to reading and writing very much as children. There were seven of us. And so that was a big part of our lives. And I kept journals, I wrote diaries, I wrote poems. I did all of that as a child, and I used to recite poems that my mother had written at different functions. So I was exposed to reading and writing and poetry all my life since I was little. And so that's been a major part of my life, always learning and always reading and always writing.
Let me follow that up then with this question. Who was your favorite writer, or who were your favorite writers when you were growing up?
Well, we read a lot of Bible stories, Aesop fables, the Nancy Drew books. Um, we were exposed to all of those, besides a lot of poetry. Um, E.B. White, Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, all of those kinds of stories, fairy tales. Um, so we grew up with all of that. Of course, I'm a lot older than Julie. I could be her mom. um, but uh, all those authors were important. All those writers were important when we were kids.
Are there authors that you like to read nowadays? Maybe those to whom you look up to?
Well, as a teacher, there were certain series that were wonderful in the classroom that the kids loved. The Dear America series, the Gary Paulson books, Beverly
Right.
Cleary, Roald Dahl. My kids laughed so hard at Fantastic Mr. Fox. They loved all those kinds of stories. So E.B. White with Charlotte's Web, that was a favorite. So we had a lot of time that we spent reading and writing. And then, of course, all the tests came along where we had paragraph writing that we needed to teach, as well as letter writing. And certainly the children benefited a lot from geography and letter writing and all of that when we did the pen pal project with
Yeah.
Julie's class. So it was a good learning experience as well as emotional and healing for all of us.
Julie, what about you when you were growing up? Who did you like to read?
So I enjoyed Shel Silverstein a lot, and I know that everyone loves his The Giving Tree,
Yes.
but I actually would tell people to focus on his very funny poems. He's a great poet, and he did some really great poems that make you think. So he was pretty special. I still reread it, do that stuff with my class, and I just love it. I would say that for today, I really enjoyed the Hunger Games series, Suzanne Collins. I
Okay.
like the page turning ability in that one. I like anything that just really, the world building, and it makes you really just fly through it. Um, so those are just some thoughts I had on that topic.
Now, as we're getting toward the end of our interview, let me give you an opportunity to speak with the audience from your heart, as you've done throughout this interview, and it's well appreciated. Elaine and Julie, what advice would each of you give to aspiring authors who wish to have their work published? Elaine, let's start with you first.
Well, I think all of us have a tendency to think our life is boring and not very interesting, and we really don't have anything to say. So why try? But I've found I've lived long enough. I'm 76 years old, and I realize that we really do have an interesting life. There are many things that have happened in our lives that are worth telling, and people can learn from our experience, from our wisdom. And so our story of the 9/11 experience, I think, was really touching and important to share because it does teach people to pay acts of kindness forward. Um, my story of a pig's tail is a true story that actually happened to me, raising a pig on a farm in Missouri. And it also allowed me as a teacher to teach homophones to children. And so those were interesting experiences that I actually lived and was able to share with others. And I think that's valuable to share our experiences with other people because they can learn from us.
Hey, and Julie?
So my earliest exposure to writing, it always was very purpose driven. As I said earlier, like, okay, so I'm in a college for writing, so now I'm going to write for an assignment. Or previous to that, I actually wrote letters to the editor to my local newspaper about issues that I cared about. And I would say that today, it's almost easier for young people than it was for me because they have the blogging abilities and Substack and all the things that their thoughts they can put out there without having to like worry if an editor accepts the letter or if they get the type of assignment from the college that appeals to them. They can just write and put their stuff out there. And so I think you just got to keep writing. And, if you're passionate about a topic or if it's fiction, if you have a story in your head, then get it out there. And nowadays, look at fan fiction. Look at that whole genre, and you're inspired by a movie and then you go off and write your sequel to the movie and you put it out in fan fiction. So I would just say, don't let anyone stop you on that. So.
Now,
Absolutely.
we had talked a lot before we came on the air about different access and materials and whatever. I know that folks would like to get more information about you both. They would like to order a copy of your book and maybe even contact you for personal appearances. So, Julie, first, how can they do that?
So I wanted to say that if people Google the title of our book, United States of Friendship, Pen Pals of 9/11, they will find our appearances on both the Kelly Clarkson show, which we were able to do earlier this year, very exciting, and News Nation, the other interview that Elaine was referring to previously, as well as a few of the local newspapers, both in Illinois and New Jersey, that we did interviews for around this book. That'll be there. And you'll also see that our book is on sale in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and particularly special to me is the 9/11 Museum in New York City also carries our book. So you can find a lot of that. You know, our publisher, which is Fulton, has a page that you can get to if you Google the title of our book. Also, my email is Julie, Julie, dot, or period, O'Connor, Oconnor, at aplnj.org. AP as in Peter, LN as in Nancy, J.org. And Elaine.
Okay. Elaine?
Well, and my email is lowercase ELA 27 MROC at Comcast.net. And that should help you if you needed to reach me.
You both are just fascinating individuals, and the work that you do obviously comes from your heart. And before I do my close, I want to just recognize that fact. The message that you are sending out is one that we all need to have, that we need to care for each other, that we need to be kind and sensitive and good listeners, all those things that maybe some of us should have learned back in the elementary grades as we were coming up through the ranks, but that are as important today as they have ever been. So I'd like to salute you both for that wisdom and that insight.
Thank you so much.
Now, Julie and Elaine, thank you both for taking an author's journey with us today. You both are fine writers, you're dedicated educators. And again, I can't say this enough, you truly do care for your audience, no matter what their age or their background or their situation. And that says a lot about both of you. Furthermore, your kindness, your generosity of spirit throughout not just today's chat, but in all the dealings I've had with you up to this point, and I'm sure in the future, all of those are greatly appreciated. You are two fine individuals who have pure hearts and a kind purpose in this life. I think we would be lacking greatly if we didn't have the both of you to inspire us. So Julie and Elaine, thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe, for this opportunity. We really do appreciate it. And it's been delightful getting to know you too as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For An Author's Journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.